In the past couple of weeks, the issue of free speech has once again ridden up the political agenda in the UK. The Online Safety Act has come under fire from the White House and others. The Higher Education Freedom of Speech Act came into force on Friday, and hundreds of people have been arrested for supporting Palestine Action, a group prescribed as a terror organisation by the government, with hundreds more due to be arrested if a march organised by Defend Our Juries goes ahead. So in this video, we're going to try our best to figure out whether the UK does actually have a free speech problem, and argue that, wherever you stand on the issue, it's hard to deny that the current legislative framework could do with a bit of a reworking. Never miss an episode and always feel in the loop by subscribing and ringing the bell. So let's get straight into it. In the UK, freedom of expression is guaranteed by Article 10 of the European Convention on Human Rights, incorporated into UK law via the Human Rights Act of 1998. However, Article 10 allows for, quote, formalities, conditions, restrictions, or penalties as are necessary in a democratic society. And, well, the UK has a lot of restrictions. Broadly speaking, they can be split into three categories: hate speech restrictions, terror speech restrictions, and online speech restrictions. When it comes to hate speech restrictions, the central piece of legislation is the Public Order Act of 1986, which restricts threatening or abusive speech likely to cause harassment, alarm, or distress. The act was expanded by the Racial and Religious Hatred Act in 2006 to include restrictions on speech, quote, intended to stir up racial or religious hatred, which was in turn expanded to include hatred against sexual orientation by the Criminal Justice and Immigration Act 2008. The language stirring up hatred has been criticised as being too vague, and the legislation has triggered a fair bit of controversy in recent years. This was the law, for instance, that was used against Republicans who protest King Charles's visit to Edinburgh a couple of years ago, who were arrested for simply carrying signs saying "Not my king," or shouting who elected him. The same laws were also used against most of the social media users arrested after the Southport riots last year, including Lucy Connolly, who was sentenced to 2 years and 7 months for tweeting "mass deportation now" and urging followers to set fire to hotels that were housing asylum seekers. On top of this, there are also non-crime hate incidents, which oblige the police to record incidents of apparently offensive speech that don't reach the threshold of criminality, but can still be recorded and used in record checks seen by potential employers. These are defined as incidents perceived by a person other than the subject to be motivated wholly or partly by hostility or prejudice towards persons with a particular characteristic. Again, this is a very wide definition, and NCHIs have been the source of some controversy. In 2024, for instance, Telegraph columnist Alison Pearson claimed that she was investigated for a non-crime hate incident for a tweet about Pakistan's former Prime Minister Imran Khan, which she posted a year earlier, while a 9-year-old was recorded for insulting a classmate. Anyway, when it comes to terror speech, the central piece of legislation is the Terrorism Act of 2006, which builds on the Terrorism Act 2000. Specifically, the act bans supporting, encouraging, or glorifying terrorism directly or indirectly. Again, the language around glorifying terrorism has been criticised as too vague, and the government also has extremely wide discretion when it comes to prescribing terrorist groups. This was the legislation used by the current government to prescribe Palestine Action as a terror group after activists vandalised RAF aircraft at the Brize Norton Air Base, and against John Farley, who was arrested at a silent protest in Leeds last month for holding a printout of a private eye cartoon mocking the government's response. Now, more than 200 people have already been arrested for protesting Palestine Action's prescription, with many further arrests likely if today's demonstration goes ahead. Finally, online speech restrictions essentially build upon the existing hate and terror-related restrictions, and the central piece of legislation is the 2003 Communications Act, which outlaws any online communication that is, quote, grossly offensive or of an indecent, obscene, or menacing character. Again, the law has been criticised for its vague language, and this is the legislation that was used against Count Dankula, the YouTuber who taught his dog to do a Nazi salute. More recently, it was used against a couple who were arrested for complaints they made about their daughter's primary school, which included comments on WhatsApp. There's also the Online Safety Act, which became law in 2023, but the relevant regulator, Ofcom, only started enforcing it earlier this year. Now, there are specific speech-restricting provisions in this act. Section 179, for instance, makes it a crime to say something you know to be false that causes a non-trivial psychological harm. But the Act's main purpose is to place a more general duty of care on online platforms to take action against illegal content, or legal content that could be harmful to children. In practice, however, this means banning harmful content for not just children, but anyone who isn't willing to give up their data for age verification purposes. And because the penalties for non-compliance are so severe, up to 10% of a company's annual turnover, most companies have taken a risk-averse attitude when it comes to defining harmful. On Reddit, for instance, subreddits related to alcohol, like r/cider, have been restricted, as have hundreds of posts on X. Now, as we see it, there are three criticisms to be made of the current legislation. First, it's quite restrictive. According to the latest Global Expression report, Brits have the least freedom of expression in Western Europe. Second, it takes up too much time to police. The police arrest more than 30 people a day for online posts under the Online Communications Act, double the rate in 2017, and up to 60,000 hours a year are spent investigating non-crime hate incidents, with 13,200 incidents recorded in the year to June 2024. But the third, and perhaps most substantial criticism, is that it's all just too unclear. There are too many overlapping, vaguely written laws, which means that it's hard to know what's legal and what's not, especially when it comes to online communications. Now, you might say that this is just a consequence of the fact that writing free speech law is difficult, and there is an argument for writing principles-based legislation that can then develop as technology changes. But wishy-washy language is also a way for Parliament to pass the buck, shifting responsibility onto regulators, the police, and the courts, who are all already under strain to essentially reinterpret their legislation. This isn't the way it should be. It makes the legal framework more inconsistent and confusing. And fundamentally, Parliament should be the one making these difficult decisions. Ultimately, wherever you stand on free speech, it's hard to deny that current UK legislation is too confusing, and clarity alone would probably help to diffuse the wider political issue. Everything we've discussed in today's video plays into a broader sense of uncertainty in the world at the moment. And who's so often at the middle of all of that? Well, the United States. So in the next issue of our magazine, Too Long, we're discussing this geopolitical shift and whether we're currently observing the end of the American order. In that section, we discuss everything from the collapse of democratic norms in the US, to the decline of American soft power, to issues with the US economy, or the battle for universities, before discussing who could potentially take over in a post-American world. So if you want to find out what we really think, now's your chance. It's not just the US though. This issue is our longest ever at 78 pages, full of our very best journalism and analysis. So we also get into why Germany's military might is growing, if Farage could become the UK's next Prime Minister, why countries are outsourcing their migrants, why the global order is collapsing with Professor James Kerr-Lindsay, and why leaders like Putin and Netanyahu seem to be getting away with it. The magazine has now officially been published, so if you order a copy today, we'll ship it as soon as we can. Or if you select the digital edition, we'll send a digital version of Too Long straight to your inbox. Plus, if you want the very best deal, you should make sure you subscribe to Too Long. That way, not only do you get every issue going forward, but you'll also get 20% off every copy as long as you're a member. On top of that, this week only, if you use code LASTCHANCE20, you'll get an additional 20% off this copy, bringing down the cost from £9.99 to £6.40 for the digital edition, or £13.99 to £8.96 for the physical edition. This really is your last chance too. From next month, all new subscribers won't receive this issue of Too Long, instead having to wait until December's The New Middle East issue. So if you want the reduced subscriber pricing on this issue, this really is your last chance. As we outlined in our recent video on TLDR's finances, TLDR actually made a loss last year, and Too Long is a big part of our plan to make TLDR profitable in 2025, in order to continue funding the free videos that we make every day. So if you want to be part of that, then head to toolong.news and subscribe today.